Hey, it's Natalie Baumgartner with UT Extension. I am really glad to welcome you to our hot off the presses trial recap from our 2020 year. So this is just going to be a quick overview of what we learned in our trial this year, especially for you as participants and as our very, very valued trialers, because none of this would have been able to happen without you, as well as just a little bit of a highlight of some of the things that are coming up next year. So as a quick summary, our 2020 trial was released in the early part of February. We had participants rolling in from the very first day. We had everything mailed out by mid-March, and we were able to get 150 participants involved this year, which was actually a pretty good success considering that the world kind of came to a crashing halt right there in the middle or end of March. And so we probably could have signed up a few more, but we had a great crop of participants that were already involved before mailing and all of that got shut down by coronavirus. So between 600 and 700 trials were sent out. We had 20 regular trials plus a couple of blind trials and a youth trial. So it was a really great combination of information. And as you already know, because you filled out the survey, we are beginning to collect some additional information from our trialers. For instance, we asked people how long they had been gardening. And we, of course, got the whole range from decades to just beginning. Our average gardener had been gardening for 28 years. We also asked people how much they thought they had produced in their own home garden this year. And of course, we had a few community gardens for whom that wasn't highly appropriate question, but from our home gardeners, we actually got an estimate of about 120 pounds of produce in their own home garden. Most reported that they didn't experience any trial failure, but there were some human errors, some germination. We had a weird kind of cold spring. And just to give you a little bit of background as to containers, raised beds, where are people growing, this is really useful for us in Extension to think about how we're best serving people and helping them to do an even better job of growing their gardens. So just under half were growing in ground, with a little over a third in raised beds. Of course, some in raised beds that didn't have any soil, like a peat or a pine bark mix, and then several were in containers. So you see we have a really interesting combination of folks, with actually the majority now, just a tiny majority, are growing not in a traditional garden. So that kind of makes us think, oh, well, we need to have compact cultivars and those kinds of things to best serve our audience. We ask a little bit about fertilization to kind of give us some insight into where some issues might be occurring as far as nutrition. So some were not really using any fertilizer. Almost a third were using compost alone. Almost a third were using compost combined with a bone meal or blood meal or some other type of organic fertilizer. And about 15% were using primarily a conventional fertilizer. So that tells you just a little bit about our gardeners and kind of where this information is coming from. Without further ado, let's jump into the results roundup. So our first trial was bush beans. So these are snap green beans. We had Provider and Annihilator. So kind of an older standard Provider cultivar with a pretty new on the market Annihilator. Statistically, these came out pretty much even. So you can see Provider there, a little bit higher ratings and percentage recommending, but that didn't come out to be statistics. So both look pretty good on yield. Provider had been well rated as far as health, and Annihilator for appearance. So just to give you a little bit of idea of what these beans look like, that's Annihilator. That's right there on the left side of the screen. Really beautiful dark green bean. This is Provider right here. Now, in terms of the filet bean, we did have a little bit more difference breaking out between those cultivars. So we had Maxabel, which had a 9 rating. So you can see Maxabel, a nice long, thin bean with 100% of our participants who would recommend that. Tavera was a little bit more of a traditional small or petite filet bean. And so it had, fine ratings, but in the 7.6 and about 71% who would recommend. A lot of people made comments about the yield, about the easy picking practices for Maxabel. Tavera with a little bit smaller bean, took a little bit longer to pick. So that was where a few of those comments kind of broke out. We had a fun combination of a trial that was blind beans. So people trialed these throughout the whole season without knowing what the cultivar names were. And so, drum roll please, our blind purple bean was a cultivar called Amethyst. And it was actually one of the surprises and the fun, very highly rated cultivars in this trial. So you can see some Amethyst there. Beautiful dark purple. Now, of course, it does turn green when it's cooked, but it had an 8.4 rating. 92% of folks would recommend that. And then, you know, in a little bit of an interesting twist, the blind green bean was actually the Tavera, which came from the filet trial. So it had pretty similar numbers to what we saw in the named trial as well. Our heirloom pole bean, we had rattlesnake. Those are some small rattlesnake beans there in the image compared to lazy housewife. And so these did statistically break out. Rattlesnake ran away with the competition, an 8.6 rating. 100% of trialers would recommend it in terms of health, size, appearance, and yield. For the first time in probably 3 years, we had a edible soybean, or an edamame, in the trial. And once again, we did have some clear differences breaking out here. So Tankuro, this is Tankuro right before I seeded it, so it's a dark bean, ran away with the competition and beat Chadra Green, with 100% of people recommending it. In terms of okra, now this one was our winner from 2018 and 2019 compared against each other. So the old standard Clemson Spineless, open pollinated, compared with a newer F1 hybrid. And this is pretty much what you call fighting to a draw. So we didn't have any statistical differences. We had a lot of people who had good comments about both of these different okras. So this is Clemson Spineless. You may recognize it, a little bit of a lighter green, a little bit skinnier pod, and this is Jambalaya, so it's a little bit darker green, but you know, both good yield and taste numbers from our trialers for both of those. In terms of slicer cucumbers, we pulled one of our favorites from the 2018 trial, which was General Lee, and we compared that against a new disease-resistant, especially downy mildew-resistant cultivar. And once again, we kind of saw the older cultivar that we had grown before coming out ahead in terms of health, appearance, first fruit. And you can see the trends are there for a higher rating and a percent recommendation for our General Lee. Here you can see those fruits beside each other. In terms of appearance, quite similar, very traditional slicing cucumbers. Once again, of course, we had a compact cucumber. You know, a lot of our trialers grow in raised beds or containers, so this continues to be a very popular option. We had returning winners from 2017 and 2019, and so we trialed Spacemaster and Saladmore. And you can see not a big statistical breakout, but we did have lots of good comments on taste and yield, especially for Spacemaster. Saladmore, you can see, had a few oddities in fruit shape and size sometimes. Spacemaster kind of looks a little bit more like a straight 8 or one of your traditional garden cucumbers. So those are a few of the takeaway messages from our trialers. In terms of the snacker cucumber, so this was a new trial for us. Cucumbers that are harvested typically at 4 to 6 inches, so a smaller. These, if they are not, the cucumbers are seedless, and they have thin skin. So Greenlight, a recent All-American Selections winner, kind of had higher trends, and I think it was one of the favorites of the trials, for especially for those of us who are able to distribute our fruit to the young people in our lives. So it got good rating as far as taste and snackability. Here you can see Greenlight. We did get a little bit more feeding sometimes on these thin-skinned fruit if you have cucumber beetle issues, so those are things to keep in mind. But that's Greenlight, and this is Muncher, which tended to be a slightly larger fruit. Greenlight came into harvest early, very prolific yield. So when it came to muskmelons, Sugar Cube has been one that has been hard to beat, and so it's a favorite from some of our earlier trials, a personal-sized muskmelon that has fusarium resistance, so pretty good disease resistance package, and you can see it pairs well with all sorts of sweet things. We didn't have a huge trial number for this trial, and so our statistical breakout wasn't distinct, but you can definitely see the trends are there as far as an 8.8 rating, as well as 100% of people recommending Sugar Cube. This may have been one of the first years that we actually got some pretty good results back from a watermelon trial. So we had Sweetie Pie, which was a uniformly dark fruit, and Mambo, which was a striped fruit. And while these didn't break out statistically, you can see pretty good ratings and pretty good percentage recommend. These were both seeded cultivars, and as far as taste and productivity, both pretty good performers for our trialers this year. This was a baby or a mid-size butternut trial. So here you're looking at a picture of Metro. We trialed Metro, which is a newer F1 hybrid, against Brulee, which is a newer but open pollinated cultivar, really selected more for taste and culinary quality. And you can see a pretty similar breakdown as far as the yields. Almost 90% of people recommending both of these, so pretty good results from our butternut trials. Patty pan squash were a fun one that we put into our summer squash trial this year. And this would be an example, again, of an almost straight up tie. So we have the F1 hybrid G-Star, so that's the darker green there on the left, and then a heirloom Benning's green tint, so you can see a lighter green, easier to pick sometimes and pull out of the plant. So those were some good things on Benning's green tint, and pretty similar rating and percent recommendation from all of our trials. And green zucchini, you actually saw a little bit of difference breakout between these two. So both fairly new hybrid options, both have pretty good disease packages, but you can see a higher rating and good comments, and kind of a difference that we see on health, in first fruit, and in yield from desert. Also a little bit of a darker green color, which most of the time our trialers tend to like, over a slightly medium green color on our green machine. Yellow zucchini continues to be trials that are rated very high, and this year was no exception. We had a couple of slightly different in appearance cultivars. So Gold Mine was a lighter striped cultivar, and Golden Glory was a darker uniform color, but sometimes we tend to see a little bit of green ends, which happens oftentimes genetically in some of these yellow zucchini. And you can see high ratings, 7.9 and 8.2 overall. Over 80% of our trialers would recommend these. So both of these came out pretty high and performed pretty well across the state in our home garden trials. Now, when it came to yellow squash, we saw a little bit of difference breaking out. We have grand prize at 8.7 rating, with almost 90% of people who would recommend it, and significantly higher recommendations in terms of germination, in health, and in first fruit. So it just may be that you'll see grand prize coming up again, trialing against some of our other really well-performing yellow squash in the future. Basil, right, the herb, continues to be one of the highest participation items that we have in our trial. And so people grow it in raised beds and containers. It has great versatility. And we typically focus on a very edible, right, Genovese basil type. So a really traditional basil flavor. This year was no different. We had some differences in terms of disease resistance and in growth habits. So Obsession is a newer downy mildew resistant cultivar, while Everleaf, while also a newer cultivar, doesn't have quite as strong a downy mildew resistance, but it had a much more compact habit. And both of these tend to delay bloom fairly well. And you can see, once again, above 8 for both of these. Some people did remark that the Everleaf really stayed nice in container. It did have a long delay as far as blooming, and in some instances it may have had a mild, more palatable flavor than Obsession. So both really really good results overall. Chives, this is the first time that we've grown chives, actually a perennial herb, but we grew them as an annual in our trial this year. We had the All-American Selection winner Geisha garlic, so it is a flat leaf type of chives with, as you might guess, a little bit more of a garlic flavor as compared to a more traditional onion type flavor of chives, and folks liked it. So it was significantly higher rated as far as numerically, 8.4 to 6.1, a little bit higher in terms of those recommending it, with good comments on health and appearance for Geisha garlic. You can see these are from my trial plots in Knoxville, where I actually grew them in a plastic raised bed, but we had a lot of folks who grew these in containers and smaller raised beds. So really a good versatility out of our herbs. Once again, we had 2 flower trials. We want to grow good cutting or good garden flowers that are easily grown from seed. And so this year we had Cosmos in the trial. Sensation Mix is actually an All-American selection winner for back in the 30s, so it has been around for years. And it was very evenly rated against a double-flowered, double-click pink. And you can see pretty good ratings, pretty high recommendation for both of these. Bachelor's Button, or Centaurea, is a cool season flower. And so we may have had a few gardeners who got started a little bit late, had a little bit of trouble with germination because of getting started a little bit later in the spring than would be ideal. But overall, pretty good numbers for both the very classic choice mix. We had some very good comments on people really liking the traditional blue of this Bachelor's Button, as well as on Classic Magic, which had a little bit different combination of color mixes. And for the first time in a while, we had a cool season crop in the trial in 2020. We had collards. Some people grew them as a spring crop. Some people grew them as a fall crop. And so once again, the open pollinated champion and the hybrid, slightly newer cultivar Flash, very similar ratings and percent recommendations. So both of these performed well for our trialers in Tennessee. We hope that that gives you a fun and exciting kind of recap on some of the evaluations that you were a key part of turning in. And we also want to share with you some fun that's coming up for 2021, because we would absolutely love for you to join in for our next trial. The seeds are already rolling into the office. And so we're really excited about what's coming up for 2021. With that good success on collards, we're going to expand our cool season options. So we're going to grow some lettuce, some slightly more heat tolerant or bolt tolerant lettuce that hopefully can give us a good spring season, as well as Swiss chard. Now, the key thing about these cool season crops is get your orders in early. We're only going to ship these out through the early part of March because we want to make sure that you have plenty of time to get those in and get a good spring crop. You could also save some seed or save all the seed and grow them as a fall crop. So that is an option for you, but we want to get them out soon enough that you can grow them as a spring crop. We've typically kind of held off on tomatoes and peppers because they're a little bit harder to grow transplants and things like that. But we decided that this year we were going to jump right in and have tomato seeds going out. Now, the key thing here is that these are going to be compact cultivars that are great for containers. And so the idea there being you wouldn't necessarily have to transplant them. You could just direct seed these in containers and grow them, you know, on a porch, on a patio, you know, outdoors. And so we're going to have a red and a yellow compact cultivar that can both do well in small spaces. And we're really excited to see what folks think about tomatoes. For some of our master gardeners and demo gardens, expect this year to have a fun new option of participating in a statewide trial of grafted bell pepper plants. So you'll be hearing more about that. We have a grad student who's going to be working on some of these projects. So you'll have the opportunity to team up with a young plant science researcher graduate student who is going to be working with you on some of those trials. Well, I really hope that you have enjoyed this quick tour roundup of our 2020 trial with a little bit of excitement of our 2021 trial coming up. Once again, as I close, thank you so much for all of the time and energy and investment and dedication that you put into this project. It is one of the best parts of my job to be able to work with you all on this trial, and it absolutely would not happen without you. So thanks so much, and we look forward to seeing you in 2021.